Hello everybody, welcome to week 3. This is my overview of our texts for this week for our session. So we'll be looking at a medieval drama, the second Shepherd's play from the Wakefield cycle, or Townley cycle it's sometimes called, and then 2 works by Chaucer, both from the Canterbury Tales, the general prologue. Some of you in high school may have read general prologue or excerpts from the general prologue. It's a widely read text. And then the Wife of Bath's material, her prologue and the tale itself. Also this week we have due the first paper. Remember that you can submit either the analysis paper, which is mainly a close reading of the texts that we're looking at how the text by itself makes meaning or conveys meaning, or you can turn in the research paper, which draws on outside sources to help you make an observation or argument about a text that is not necessarily confined to it. Maybe there's an historical matter that contributes to meaning in the text. That's an absolutely legitimate way of approaching a text. Maybe there's an idea that helps us to understand the text better. And as I've said previously, the main takeaway needs to be about the text rather than the historical point you're bringing in or the philosophical point you're bringing in or whatever. The takeaway should be about the text. Now your dialogue posts are back on this week, so I'll be answering your questions, and you may ask questions in addition about this week's readings. You may also ask me texts about the previous week's readings, so that would be Lawnval, Patience, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So if you have a question about those, you can pose those to me as well. Let me give you an overview now of our texts this week. So we're looking at the Wakefield second Shepherd's play. Now, what I've given to you in the reader, not only for the Wakefield play, but also for Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, is a Middle English text. So the text is in Middle English. I think it's helpful to encounter it. It's the spelling is in the manuscripts that we have anyway of Chaucer, uses the same alphabet set that we have currently for the most part, unlike say Beowulf, which uses a very different it's not a different alphabet set, but there are different letters in Beowulf that can really throw us off, and the language itself is so far removed from modern English that it's undecipherable unless you've had some exposure to Old English. Middle English, on the other hand, is close enough to modern English that you can actually start seeing how Middle English and modern English are very, very much related. Now, I won't disallow you going and finding a modern English translation. I think that can be helpful. Remember that translators make their own choices which shape meaning in ways that an author may or may not have intended. Translators act in good faith, for the most part. They act in good faith to convey an author's intended meaning, or at least the author's intended text. Still, I think there's value in encountering these texts in Middle English. The Wakefield Second Shepherd's play, if we encountered it in the manuscript, looks pretty much like how it is in the that I've given it to you in the reader. There are internal rhymes. So let me read the first stanza to you of the Wakefield Second Shepherd's play. So it starts on page 40. And before I read the first line, I'll point out to you that the characters in the play are, in the manuscript, they're not named. They're just, except for Mac, they're named like first shepherd, second shepherd, third shepherd. So here's what we have. The first stanza, the first 9 lines. Call is the speaker, the first shepherd. He says, look, if you go to an academic conference and listen to people pronouncing Middle English, you'll find kind of a range of pronunciations. For better or for worse, when I took, believe it or not, this is a thing, when I took my Middle English dialects class, we did not concentrate so much on pronunciation, but more on spelling. So, if you go on YouTube and find, some people are very adamant about this is how you pronounce Middle English. There's a range of views. I'm not going to be a stickler about it. First 9 lines of the Wakefield Second Shepherd's Play. Call is speaking, the first shepherd. Lord, what these weathers are cold, and I am ill-happed. E'am ne'er handoled, so long have ye napped. My legs they fold, my fingers are chapped. It is not as I wold, for I am all lapped in sorrow, in stormus and tempest, now in the east, now in the west. Woe is him has never raced, midday nor morrow. So there are internal rhymes. We see that cold, doled, fold, and wold in the first 4 lines are meant to rhyme with each other, and that creates kind of like a cross-rhyming pattern. What I've done is to show you, to highlight to you that stanza form. Some editions will break the line and extend them, instead of 1 line, you'll have 2 lines. So I've showed you this pattern, and I've also tried to gloss words that are particularly difficult. So these are my glosses that I've provided to you. If you see a little circle next to a word, that means that over on the right-hand side of the text, you will find the modern English equivalent of that word. And in cases where lines themselves can become kind of convoluted and difficult to follow, I have provided a modern English translation in some of those cases. So if you see a note number, right, a superscript number, just check the note at the bottom of the page. They're not always translation things. Sometimes they're conceptual things. For instance, the first few of my notes in the play are about the manuscript in which it occurs, the patterns that you see in the stanza form, and so forth. So those are all meant to help you if you don't go out and find a modern English translation and you really want to set yourself the challenge of reading in Middle English. The gloss will help you. Those marginal glosses will help you. So we have set up this complaint by a shepherd about, the weather is cold, or is it the sheep that are cold? Who knows? It's probably a play on words. Poets, not just Middle English poets, but poets throughout time, really make good use of puns, verbal word plays on how they sound. So we have this introduction of how the world is a terrible place from this shepherd. Now, as the action unfolds in the play, we'll see the other 3 shepherds who were with him, with Cole, Daw, which is a name for Dave, and Gib, which is a name for Gilbert, or something along those lines. Those shepherds also have complaints about the world too, and we could, if we wanted to, we could classify the complaints of Call, the complaints of Gil, and the complaints of Daw into types of complaints. Now, I haven't done that for our class. You're welcome to do that if you will. I think another interesting feature of the play is we have 3 shepherds who start off in their field, so to speak, and the 4th shepherd, Mac, shows up, and he clearly the shepherds know who he is, but he's kind of an outsider, and as I don't want to spoil anything for you, but as the action of the play develops, you'll realize Mac really is an outsider. In fact, he stands for a particular character in Christianity, and that will become abundantly clear. The action that takes place in the play is meant to parallel, or maybe even tell in an allegorical type of pattern, the creation and fall of the world, the incarnation of Christ, the disposition of mankind to Jesus, the attempts to thwart God's plan of salvation, and also how human beings behave in a fallen world. So the audience, when the audience sees that there is a lamb disguised as a baby, they are picking up on the Christian implications of it. Think of something like if your local church put on a play, and it's set in contemporary times, early 21st century, and presented the audience with a contemporary situation or a situation that they would recognize, like maybe construction workers or whatever the case may be, blue collar people who have jobs to do and who are complaining about the difficulties of living in the world. If your church put on that play, you would delight in those details, and also you would be picking up on the Christian themes that are being presented to you. So the Wakefield Second Shepherds play is, even though there is an overt reference to Christianity at the end of the play with the Virgin Mary and actual baby Jesus, so even though that overt reference is there, the audience is still picking up on contemporary things. Now, the audience isn't stupid. They don't think, oh, Jesus was born in England somewhere. The audience is delighting in the playwright setting this before them. So shepherds existed obviously they existed in Palestine in the 1st century AD when Jesus was born, because we're told that in the narrative. But shepherds are also, or goat herds, cow herds, are also people that exist in contemporary times, not just Middle English times, but even now. And so some of the details would strike the audience as being particularly modern, and including some of the shenanigans with Mac and Gill, or Jill rather, Mac and Jill. The audience would recognize maybe a contemporary domestic situation. It would be at once comedic, so I think we are meant to laugh at how Mac and Jill interact with each other in the context of the other 3 shepherds. We are meant to laugh at it. The audience is also meant, in addition to laughing at it, also to nod their heads knowingly and say, yes, this really is like this particular idea in Christianity. And again, I don't want to give away too much, but as the play develops, think to yourself, oh, I see what's going on now. We're talking about sin, the temptations of Satan to others, like I said earlier in the video, the attempt to thwart the incarnation in some way. So the audience is really eating this up. The 3 gifts, sometimes I make a big deal about the 3 gifts that the shepherds give at the end of the play. So again, the playwright is not a fool. He knows that the Magi bring specific gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Nevertheless, the playwright is and we don't know who the playwright was. The playwright is also trying to show, through these shepherds giving their own gifts, not a recounting of the gospel story, but trying to use the gospel structure or framework in order to reiterate Christian ideas about what Jesus is like. And what is he like? He rules over everything. He sends us the Holy Spirit. He is life in a time of death. Like winter plants that bloom during the winter are often used as symbols of Jesus, and so on and so forth. So that's what's happening in the Wakefield Second Shepherds play. And it's part of a cycle that would have been performed in the town. Probably there would have been a mobile stage that moved from one guild to another, and the members of that guild would put on a play. I don't remember who the Second Shepherds play would have been put on by, but I know that the pinners, they are people who like nail things, right? They would put on the play of the crucifixion. They would put on that part of the cycle. So it'd probably be a big town festival. This mobile stage would move around different parts of the biblical story, from the creation of the world all the way through the second coming of Jesus, would be put on in that cycle. And so the Middle Ages was steeped in Christianity. And somewhat like we might think of some parts of American society. They're steeped in Christianity, and sometimes they're so steeped in it they don't think about it, which it's unfortunate, but it's a reality. Let's shift now over to Chaucer. And if you have questions again about the Wakefield Second Shepherd's Play, you can use that as your dialogue post question this week, and I'm happy to answer that in more detail. Moving to Chaucer, the biggest named poet of the English Middle Ages. In fact, the Renaissance, many major Renaissance authors identify Chaucer as the father of English poetry. So it's not like there was no English poetry before Chaucer, but what they mean is that Chaucer had such mastery over poetic form and content that he becomes the father of English poetry, this patriarch of English poetry. Not in a bad sense, but in a good sense. So Chaucer's most common work, which we read now, is Canterbury Tales. His best work is, in fact, a work called Troilus and Cresside, which we're not reading for this class. But that is, artistically, it is Chaucer at the apex of his poetic genius. Canterbury Tales, on the other hand, I don't think Chaucer thought of it this way, but I think we could think of it as almost like a resume, where Chaucer is showing the audience, look, you want heroic poetry? I can do that. You want romance in the medieval sense, like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is romance. If you want romance, I can do that. Do you want long, boring sermons? I can do that. Do you want a typical saint's life? I can tell you the stereotypical saint's life. Do you want well-drawn characters? I can do that too, right? So Chaucer is showing his diversity in Canterbury Tales. And somebody might say, well, wouldn't that be Chaucer at his best? Is Chaucer at his most diverse, and shows that Chaucer really is as great as people assess him to be, but his great unified single work is still Troilus and Cresside. Canterbury Tales isn't even finished, right? It was supposed to be 120 stories, a cycle of 120 stories. There's only like 30-something stories in it. So it was never finished. He died before he could realize its vision, and people have come along afterwards, like very recently after Chaucer's death, and compiled Canterbury Tales into manuscript form, and that's how we have it. So we're reading General Prologue, which introduces us to the pilgrims who are making this trip to Canterbury, to the shrine of Thomas à Becket. And during the Middle Ages, people went on pilgrimages fairly often. I don't want to say everybody did it all the time, but many people did. And there would be regular places, perhaps in your own country, like Canterbury, where a major figure like Thomas à Becket experienced martyrdom, and you would go there in order to demonstrate that you care about other Christian people. Surely some people did it in order to show off and to boast, like, look, I'm going on pilgrimage. So that's true also. Nevertheless, people went on pilgrimage. The big pilgrimages would be to Rome, to the Vatican, what we now call the Vatican, or to Jerusalem. Those would be like the big major pilgrimages in Christendom. There are some other, maybe we might call them like top of the B tier pilgrimage locations. These travelers are going to Canterbury. What we're presented with is not a bunch of devout people who care about Thomas à Becket. We get a mix. We get a mix of people who we're fairly certain they don't care about Thomas à Becket, at least not that we're aware, all the way to characters that seem pious and maybe devotional enough to care about Thomas à Becket. Interestingly enough, it's not really talked about in the tales, other than to say they're on their way. So we get this range of characters, and the genius of what Chaucer does, and Shakespeare does this too a couple of centuries later. The genius of what he does is he presents us with, paradoxically, a stereotype and an individual. So when we encounter, for example, the knight, the pilgrim who is the knight, he is a stereotypical knight, dutiful in his service to king and church, has seen a lot of battles. But we also see a particular knight who is middle-aged, has seen a lot of life, has been on specific military campaigns, and that's part of why the Canterbury characters, the Canterbury pilgrims, are very appealing to many. I know that many students don't care about them, but a lot of other students do. They're really drawn by these well-developed folks. And one of those characters is the wife of Bath. So for our purposes, the purposes of our class in the general prologue is to get an idea of Chaucer's ability to represent this vast swath of people that lived in late 14th century England. And part of that would have been because he was the comptroller at the Port of London. And so he saw all kinds of people and witnessed everybody from the scoundrel to the devout, from the poor to the excessively rich. He saw many different kinds of people, and was probably drawing from his experience in presenting these characters to us. So general prologue is this broad representation of types of people presented. The paradox is they're presented as discrete individual characters. Shifting over to the wife of Bath's tale, what we get is one particular character, the wife of Bath, who is a stereotypical kind of middle-aged woman who is very driven by passions, right? She's been married 5 times. She comes right out and says, I still enjoy sexual relationships. She doesn't quite use that wording. She uses, kind of, like cute, clever, maybe not cute, but clever ways of saying it. And the audience, we nod our heads and go, oh, you're that kind of a person. And she's still, who she is. She's also a very smart woman. She runs her own business. She can quote the scriptures. Now, some people will say, well, does she quote the scriptures, or when she's quoting them, does she quote out of context? Yes, she uses the scriptures in ways that are unexpected, and I would say wrong, using them out of context. But I think the genius of the wife of Bath is, I think that she knows it, because the wife of Bath has experienced, as a woman, the scriptures being taken out of context in order to talk about how women are terrible. Jerome and Augustine would be the 2 major figures from early Christianity, late patristic era, transitioning into the Middle Ages. 2 major figures in Christianity who set the groundwork for seeing women as like the problem of sin. Augustine, so in Confessions and City of God, Augustine is probably, I don't think that he's a misogynist. I think that he understands, yes, okay, so, the first person to succumb to Satan, in the serpent, is Eve. But Augustine also really values that Mary, another woman, is kind of, you know, the fixing, I suppose, of Eve's disobedience is Mary's obedience, right? So Eve eats from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, whereas Mary follows the command of Christ. It's not really a command, but when Gabriel says, you know, you're going to bear the Savior, she humbles herself and, you know, let it be done to me as you have said. So she is, and she's a woman too, and there's not much made about whether she's a woman or not. Jerome, on the other hand, looks like he is, presenting women as a terrible plague upon mankind. And some may giggle when they hear that, but that view was a major view in the Middle Ages. Now, don't hear me saying that everybody in the Middle Ages thought this, because they didn't. In fact, you could argue about it in the Middle Ages, which showed that not everybody thought this way. What I'm trying to tell you is that there was a major strand of thought in the Middle Ages that definitely thought this, and it was common enough, I think, that many, especially women, felt exasperated by it, and the wife of Bath is one of those types of characters. And so when she misuses the scriptures or uses them in kind of ways that we would find objectionable, I would find objectionable, we have to remember that she is fighting fire with fire. It doesn't make it right. Don't hear me saying, oh, it's okay to misinterpret the scripture if you're fighting against scriptural misinterpretation. I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying that the wife of Bath, by doing that, we need to understand that she is a very smart character. So she's not like some dolt who is unable to read and interpret the Bible. She is a savvy reader of the Bible and is a formidable opponent in debate. And you have to really watch out because she sneaks some things in, like about whether virginity is a perfect state to be in. I think that the wife of Bath's presentation of the scriptures is a mix of deliberate error, right? Fighting fire with fire, which is not okay. And also, I think she does present orthodox, good scriptural interpretation too, and it's just mixed together in kind of a muddle, which also might be part of the genius of the character of the wife of Bath. Now, I don't think that Chaucer necessarily thinks the way the wife of Bath does, but as a poet who can do characters just like a good Christian writer can present to us diabolical characters without being diabolical herself or himself, Chaucer's doing something similar. The prologue is twice as long as the tale that she tells, and the prologue is this history of her life and an argument for maybe women are not all that bad, and if they are bad, let's look at some of the men around them. So that's kind of her argument. It shifts from there, and and before we shift real quick, I do think that there's a kind of charm to the wife of Bath. If you're not careful, the charm could trick us into agreeing with her, but I think we can disagree with her and still find her charming and, maybe even know somebody like that in our own lives. When we transition into her tale, what we get is something... I've read Canterbury Tales, not just for early Brit Lit survey, but when I teach Middle English literature or general medieval literature, I've read Canterbury Tales and the Wife of Bath's Tale. I've lost count how many times I've read it, and it's still striking to me that her tale seems almost unexpected given what she's talked about in her prologue. The tale is a fairy story about a knight who encounters a knight who sexually assaults somebody. The word is rape, but I think we're to understand that this is a sexual assault, and given a judgment by the queen now. So Arthur, in the Wife of Bath's tale, is similar to the Arthur that we met in Lonval and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, kind of an ineffectual king, or a king whose rule is not as morally solid as perhaps one might expect. Again, that's common throughout all time, and so on and so forth. But it's interesting to me that Arthur is presented not in ideal terms. So the queen is the one who gives judgment on the knight, and he goes on a quest, right? So that's a romance element. But then he meets this old woman, and that's the fairy tale element of the story. And what happens in his dealings with the woman who gives him the answer to his quest is we find this supernatural element, which, could be odd, strike as odd to a reader. So when you read through the fairy tale, however, I think that what we see borne out thematically, women and men and the power relationships between them. I don't want to turn this into a political discussion, but that is what's going on here. The power relationships between them thematically aligns with what the wife of Bath has been talking about in her prologue. A very practical, down-to-earth kind of story, her prologue, and then this very, otherworldly fairy tale romance type of story. So that's the connection, right? That's the consistency that makes the two cohere together. Now, a common exercise in the Wife of Bath's tale is to ask students, is the knight really being punished or not? Kind of a clever thought experiment. And I think there's value to that. What I would like to add to that consideration is if the answer... So I believe that Chaucer is presenting a knight who is experiencing something like justice. If, since that is the case, so I'm begging that question, right? Give that to me. If that is the case, where do we find the justice in it? And I think, and if you were in my Middle English Literature class, when we spent our weeks on Chaucer, we would talk about this a bit more. But I think that this is sometimes lost, especially in Canterbury Tales, which relies heavily on these characters. What is lost, I think, is Chaucer's Christianity. And some may try and argue that Chaucer is not a Christian or that he's a backslidden Christian or something like that. But if one reads through the Canterbury Tales, I think what one will find is a man who really understands Christianity and is really interested in the grace aspect of Christianity almost as much as somebody like St. Augustine, who often emphasizes, even in his battles against heresy, often emphasizes, you have this heretical view because you don't think that God's grace is big enough for these kinds of matters. So I want to put that out there. I don't want to take away the possibility of the thought experiment. I think there's some delight and usefulness in doing it. All right, so that's my presentation, my overview of our readings this week. They, again, not highly interpretive, but I want to give you some anchor points so that you can find from the text the meanings that emerge. And there are multiple facets to what these poets are doing. I usually don't try and railroad you into one facet. On occasion I will do that. I apologize beforehand. But I want to give you a little bit of leeway to take the object and kind of turn it and look at different aspects of it. All right, folks. I will be back later on. Remember that your questions have to be posted by the end of the day on Wednesday. It'll give me a chance to collate them and prepare to answer them. And then I will come back with my video for answers later on in the week. In the meantime, I hope everybody had a good Labor Day weekend. I labored part of Labor Day weekend. Perhaps you did too. Nevertheless, I hope it was enjoyable. May the Lord bless you, and I will talk to you later. Bye.